Test, test. Okay. Welcome back to the next session and welcome to the talk by Daphne Dragona. Before I hand it over to you, I'd like to quickly introduce you to Daphne's work. Daphne Dragona is an independent curator, theorist, and writer. In her current work, she addresses the challenges of degrowth for art and culture and studies the ambiguous role of technology in times of climate crisis. Daphne holds a PhD from the Faculty of Communication and Media Studies of the University of Athens and an MA in Museum Studies from the University College in London. And personally, I got to know your work in your time as conference curator of Transmediale Festival between 2015 and 2019, which was a very impressive program. In every edition, I enjoyed it every time very much. And you have a similar position now at the EMA Festival in Osnabrück, which is not quite in this region, but it's like the next region. Also an important festival with a long tradition and a really huge importance in the context of media art here in our region. And you also have curated a lot of exhibitions, among them Weaving Worlds, Weather Engines, together with UC Parica, Trials and Errors in Athens, and Reprogramming Earth in Limassol, and also a lot of publications, among them Words of Weather, which also relates to the exhibition. So I hand it over to you. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks, and the floor is yours.
I need a password by class to... All right. Good evening. Hello. Thank you very much, Fabian, class, Marine, for this beautiful invitation and also for all the hospitality here. My name is Daphne Dragona. I work as a curator and a writer. And the last few years, I have been specifically turning my attention towards the ambiguous role of technology on the environment, studying basically how it comes in to solve problems that its development and use to a great extent has created. And I'm also specifically examining the promises and possibilities of sustainable, fair or low tech. Today, I would like to talk about some of the controversies and misconceptions found in this endless loop, let's say, that in a way also captures, describes a great part of Western world's relationship to the environment with its beings and its phenomena, and what we have learned to call nature as opposed to what we call culture, our human-made world. As I work as a curator, what I would do is that I will provide something like a theoretical context in order to show afterwards and discuss some of these topics as they are being approached by artists. So to start, I think this last summer made us once again realize that somehow the speed of climate change and its impact and the impact that it has on our lives is tremendous. A lot can be actually understood in the terms that we're using. 10 years ago, we were still using the term climate change, the words climate change. Now, for some years, we have been using the words climate crisis, pointing specifically to the inequalities and the injustice that it involves. And more recently, we more and more use words like climate catastrophe, disaster collapse, and so on. The facts are known. And the changes have basically become to a great extent lived experience. They are tangible and they are no longer elusive or faraway scenarios. We are experiencing extreme heat waves, wood fires, disastrous floods, and also we know that we have to deal with high level of CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere, a continued species extinction, and a 1.2 degree of global warming. Some argue that humans need to prepare and to adapt to what is yet to come. professor of sustainability. You might have heard his work. Jem Bendel has even spoken of deep adaptation, highlighting the inevitable societal collapse that climate catastrophe will bring. For the moment, though, and as is expected, most of us, most individuals, most of the communities and societies keep on going on with their lives and slowly getting used to even images like that. This is a very recent image, it's not fake. It's from Athens, it's from 10 days ago when the western part of one of the mountains behind, let's say, the center of Athens was being burned. And I think it interestingly captures this relationship of nature to culture in a way. As we know, there is more and more discussion about climate anxiety, and especially how it felt by younger generations. I think that a lot of all this lies on our capacity to, or incapacity probably, to be able to act, to react, to have an agency in what is happening, and what is experienced not only as an environmental crisis, but as a generalized crisis, as a polycrisis, as economic historian Adam Tooze has put it, because we need to take in mind also the social, economic, and political conditions of the era. Within this context, now some of the questions that we could discuss are also known. We are asking what can be done, or basically even undone, what can be repaired, restored, and how, what forms of environmental care can one turn to, and what the role of technology is in this. As I said in the beginning of my talk, I'm mostly interested in the role of technology in confronting the climate catastrophe and how contradictory it can be. And I will maybe bring in some examples of how and what we expect from technology today. Some known examples. So, for instance, we are discussing a lot about the role of artificial intelligence, and it is truly important how big climate data can be processed nowadays thanks to machine learning and lead to precise and accurate predictions about weather and climate changes. We read a lot, and it's also very valuable, about how smart technologies are used in agriculture in times of soil degradation. And more we experience or hear about how smart thermostats are now coming into the smart homes, and together, matched with personal intelligent assistants, they can tell us about how we're dealing with consumption and help us optimize our energy use. To take it a bit more far, we can also think, of course, of green and clean technology, and how wind turbines and photovoltaics are used. And to take this a step further, we can also think of what is called geoengineering. We heard about it also yesterday at the keynote, which basically has to do with big-scale interventions in the environment. The two most known approaches being discussed is the carbon dioxide removal and the solar geoengineering. So in a way, how to capture carbon dioxide and store it in underground geological formation or in the oceans, in the ocean's reservoirs, or how to reflect the sunlight back to space with stratospheric aerosol injection. And so on and so forth. I'm not going to talk about geoengineering, but what I want to highlight here is that these are very severe climate interventions that have not been tried yet, and their impact in a way remains unknown. Two very good books that deal with these topics are the books by Frédéric Neirath, The Unconstructable Earth, and After Geoengineering by Holly Jean Book. And especially Holly Jean Book very much discusses that we need to think about what happens after, what are the consequences that will be faced and by whom. And whereas Neirath very much highlights what happens exactly with geoengineering, and he talks a bit about the distance that is being implied. He specifically discusses how we have learned to see Earth in a way as an object that can be controlled, that can be monitored, that can be to extent be programmed. And exactly this distance that we have taken from Earth, as we are not part of it, is a great part of the problem. Oops. Yes. So this is something that also Rosi Braidotti discusses, the feminist thinker, who also talks about the problem of distance, and she brings in this the problematics of the imaginary of progress, the imaginary of growth, because we have somehow learned in the Western world to identify technological innovation with growth. And what Braidotti says here is exactly that somehow progress is defined by the distances it establishes from the natural order and those who inhabit it. So again, like the distance that we take from the environment, and what does that mean? Now, of course, one should not generalize here and should not fall into this trap, because populations and peoples around the world are not equally responsible, nor did they have the same relationship and have the same relationship with the environment. The undertaking of the earth as a resource, the undertaking of the earth as something that we can continuously exploit, is something that mostly has to do with the privileged, careless world, mostly found in the Western and Northern hemisphere. Growth is, to a great extent, as Anna Ching says, understood as expansion also, as a scaling up. And one maybe needs to look back and ask, why did we come to realize expansion as something that is a good thing? Why this naturalization of expansion? Why is this bigness progress? She asks. And Ching also talks about the problems with scalability, with the ability to expand, because she says that when we scale up, we do not allow changes, really. We do not take in mind the heterogeneity, and this excludes biological and cultural diversity, as also it does not allow relationships to be created, and therefore it does not allow transformation and change to really happen. This is, let's say, the context that I wanted to bring in order to now talk a little bit about how these problematics of seeing the planet as something outside, as being detached from it, as something that we can control, to engineer, to see the planet as something that we can continuously use the way we want to use. And the problematics of all this is being approached by artists and is being addressed and questioned. I will talk a bit about this exhibition that I co-curated with UC Parika last year. It took place in Athens. It was a project of Onassis Stegi, and it was hosted at the premises of Onassis Stegi, as well as at the National Observatory of Athens, which is the main institution in Greece that also deals with meteorology and climate changes. The exhibition featured 26 works. I will only refer to a few of them, and I will highlight how we were interested in the systems, in the technologies and infrastructures that make, monitor, or restore the weather and the climate. So with our exhibition, we wanted to refer to the discussion of geoengineering and the problems that it involves. We wanted to tackle the relationship of human and non-human bodies to the planet, how we also in a way make the weather. And we also wanted to remind ourselves and how the forests and the oceans, how the earth circles are basically in a way also important engines that grant life to all of us. I will mention a few examples from our show. This is a work by the Manifest Data Lab. It's called Carbon Topologies. And what you see is basically a 3D printed model that maps the human footprint. What it does is that you see that there are these spikes on the globe, on this sphere that is basically the Earth, and the spikes show where most of the carbon's emissions have been from the 70s until now. So it maps the locations, the amounts, and the flows of CO2 resulting from the global economy. And in a way, it basically maps the activity of so-called growth. Data refers to fossil fuel emissions, to energy usage, to manufacturing, transportation, travel, production. And as you can imagine, it manifests how CO2 emissions have varied predominantly in the global north. And it is, in a way, an evidence of historic responsibility and inequality and power distribution. A second project that I would like to mention is by the duo Design Earth, that they are designers and architects. They are known for the drawings and the animations that they do, and their so-called geostories. They use speculation, so they imagine what would happen if something would taken to extremes in a way, discussing the climate crisis. And this is a work that they did for the Venice Biennale of 2021, the Architectural Biennale. It's called The Planet After Geoengineering. And it's a graphic animation about different climate engineering proposals from the 19th century until now that have been proposed, and what would happen if they would be applied. Who would be affected, and how different lands and populations would suffer. Specific peoples would not even have the right to breathe. But as part of our exhibition, we also offered views and images that had to do with infrastructures being used to monitor, let's say, the well-being of the oceans and the forests. So this is a project by Metallurgy. It's a video piece and also a photograph accompanied by two texts. And what the duo of these British artists and Metallurgy did was that they kind of they wanted to show how the ocean is one of the most important climate engines, and put the emphasis on the tools and the technologies that we now use to monitor these changes. But when you would see the video, you would also realize that somehow it's in a way like the ocean itself. It's approached in a way like a patient. You see images that remind you a little bit of a hospital, I would dare to say. Another work by Barbara Marcel had to do more with the forest, specifically with the Amazon, and it presented the highest tower found in the Amazon. It's 300 meters high. It's the Amazon Tall Tower Observatory, as it's being called. It's found in Brazil. It's much higher than the forest, and it's there, of course, to monitor and study the forest, the soils, and the atmosphere and their relations. What is very precious about this work is that she brings together the scientists that work in this tower together with people from the local community that live there and fight against the pollution and the exploitation that takes place. So we see how scientific knowledge is basically exchanged with local traditional knowledge, as we could call it. And here are some different examples. I would very briefly like to mention that when we talk about infrastructures, it's always very important for our field in media arts to remember the role of DIY infrastructures and how artists are using them. And like we have seen DIY infrastructures for different fields like communication networks and so on, here we have the case of artists that are building up their own kind of antennas and ground stations to capture the signal of weather satellites. And they decode this, and the specific artists, Psara and Brio, they even kind of make some kind of a neat map, a map that is knitted from the meteorological image. And it's also kind of very interesting how This is a kind of an embodied process. Audrey Briot here is basically wearing a jumpsuit that has an antenna, so she's having her arms like that because she's capturing the satellite like that, the satellite signal. And you might also, for instance, know the work of Open Weather, a very important duo that also works with DIY infrastructures that claim meteorological knowledge. And what they do is that they run workshops that they teach people how to use these infrastructures and also to associate it to the to their local weather, but they use the word weather and atmosphere also metaphorically. So in relation to the sociopolitical atmospheres, let's say, that somebody is experiencing. And the last example from the exhibition that I would like to bring in has to do more with what I said that, while also bringing in the forests and the oceans, how living organisms play the role in their climate. And this is a work by Matthias Fritsch. It's called Mycelium Garden. The work was a living sculpture, a living installation that the artist cultivated already before the exhibition so that they would bloom when the exhibition happened. It's like different species of mushrooms. And he wanted to highlight the important contribution of fungi, of mushrooms for the planet, because while plants, let's say, convert sun's energy into chemical energy, what fungi do is that they have the ability to break down anything organic and feed on the energy stored in organic matter. And it's also, we know about how plants and fungi kind of can collaborate in a way, and how fungi as decomposers, they basically create the basis for the next cycle of life, for the evolution of life. And apart from that, which was a work that the audience loved, it had to do also with the fact that you would really see something alive, was that it was very interesting to realize what happens when a work literally leaves very low waste or almost no waste. The mushrooms had a life cycle of, let's say, 1 week. When they would be old, they would be harvested and offered to the people of Onassis Stegi to cook them, or to people from the audience that wanted to try these mushrooms. They were all edible, of course. And after the installation finished, the bags from the installation were given to people that had gardens, because they can be used as a precious kind of material to fertilize, to nourish the soil, or to people that wanted to grow, to cultivate mushrooms. And of course, the other materials used, like the ropes and the wood, were used by the artist for the next edition of the work. And this is a bridge to the third and last part of my talk, which has to do with degrowth. And the question that somehow I also raised to myself after the exhibition finished, about what is the role of art in what happens nowadays, about when we are asking what can still be done, what the role of technology is, how we can provoke change. What stance do we here as curators, artists, organizers take in all this? And so I happened to start reading a lot about Degrowth a year before. I'm not a specialist. I have worked quite a bit on the commons, but Degrowth was something relatively new for me. But I was fascinated about how much sense it makes in relation to what we are experiencing nowadays. So degrowth is a key notion that I guess a lot of you might be familiar with. It basically stresses the incompatibility of capitalist economic growth, and while also offering alternatives. The term first appeared in a text by André Gortz in French as Décroissance back in the mid-70s. And here I have a small excerpt where God says that it's not so much growth that must be attacked as the illusion which it sustains, the dynamic of ever-growing and never-frustrated niche on which it is based. Already then, Andre Gortz was kind of highlighting that somehow human activity finds in the nature, in the natural world, its external limits. And that somehow we had to let go of this illusion of progress and to demand change based on individual and political action. So practices of degrowth from then until now have a lot to do with the principles of conviviality and coexistence, and on the idea that lives need to be equally respected. And if we want to bring it closer to our times, degrowth has been discussed in relation to resources depletion, it has been discussed in relation to waste, it has been discussed in relation to planetary emergency. And interestingly enough, we discussed it also 2 years ago with the pandemic when we experienced all this pause, when human world was basically asked to slow down. But what looked like the growth, it was not the growth. It was something that we needed to do in order also somehow as the states and the health system tried to do to save lives and not the economy, which was a good thing. But unfortunately, we didn't learn so much from what happened then with respect to how the environment got a chance to breathe. So different authors have been discussing technology within this context, within the context of degrowth, and this attempt to slow down, to shape futures that serve and assist different and multiple worlds, beings, lands, and territories. I would also like to mention here, before I refer to this book, that George Callis, who is one of the most important thinkers on the topic of degrowth, highlights that we should not think too much about the limits, the existing limits of the environment and the role of technology, because when one puts the effort there, then one also kind of assumes that it is possible to stretch the limits. And he says that the difference is that we need to realize that the resources on this planet for all humankind are basically, in a way, enough and should be enough. This stretching is what creates this misconception that has to do with the use of technology and science. So which technologies could we imagine as part of the degrowth approach? The most known kind of reference comes from, again, from the 70s. It's a book by Ivan Illich. It's called Tools for Conviviality. And back then, Illich spoke of the need of tools that can, at the same time, empower social relationships and offer alternative visions to industrial existence and productivity. So the tools he referred to were of different scale and different scope. So he talked about devices, about machines, about artifacts, about even codes and their operators. But they all had a common denominator, that they could be controlled, dismantled, and repaired by the users. And this, in his opinion, would help the creation of an equal and responsible society. And this thought was taken further and brought to our times by Andrea Vetter, a German scholar, a transformation researcher, an activist and journalist, who has authored who has also co-authored the book "The Future Is Degrowth," a very, very good book that I think came out 2 years ago, and has also worked a lot on what she calls convivial technologies and convivial techniques that question technological innovation. And in her opinion, convivial technologies could be described as the ones that have the following features. And she mentions relatedness, and this has to do with what kind of relations technologies create, what does it bring to people. Adaptability, so how independent, modular they are. Accessibility, we can all imagine what this is, how accessible they are. Biointeraction, so how do these technologies affect living organisms in the planet? and appropriatedness, that refers to the locality, the context, the so-called situatedness. So she takes in mind all the life cycle of the production, use, and end of use of technologies. And another approach that I would like to mention and have in mind has to do with the work of Julia Watson, and this is the book called Low Tech. Here we have to do with the play of words. She refers to low tech, which is the opposite of high tech, as we all know, a critique to high-end technology and more a turn towards traditional technology. But Watson also here playing with the words by low tech refers to local and to technological, ecological knowledge. So she's putting her emphasis on traditional knowledge and more specifically to technologies to indigenous technologies and to how they have been kind of ignored and forgotten. And this also brings to mind an important book by Elke Krasny, one very important scholar, more coming from the world of architecture, that has worked on care and infrastructures. And she talks about the infrastructures that we need that have to do with care for water and land, care for skills, care for repair, care for local production, and so on. And with these references in mind, I kind of curated last year's program for European Media Art Festival, EMAF, and invited speakers in order to discuss together how we can change pace and how to respect different rhythms of different words. And examples of low tech and traditional knowledge were very much brought in. I would quickly again refer to some artists and designers whose work I find kind of exemplary. So Chris de Decker is a writer and a designer that we were very happy to have him talking for IMAF this year. And this is a screenshot from his website. He's the initiator of the Low Tech magazine. De Decker rejects the assumption that for every problem there is a high-tech solution. And the Low Tech magazine is interestingly a website about how to build a sustainable society. And he's collecting, writing, bringing together low-tech solutions. The website itself is a static website. It runs 100% on solar energy. And what does that mean? It means that when the weather is not good, when there is no sun, the website is not functioning. It's a kind of a symbolic also gesture, because what he highlights is that it is our habit, that the habits that also need to change. And he also brings a lot of examples that have to do with how older technologies and knowledge that we are leaving aside paid more attention to the location, to the time period, to the weather, to the season, and how we can turn again to that if we want to build a kind of, to turn towards a more sustainable way of living. So here you can see at this image to the left, I mean, some of his approaches are also have a humorous approach to an extent. So here to the left, there's a bike, the bike generator, as he called it. And it's a bike that he uses to generate energy at his home. So when his photovoltaic doesn't work, because there is no sun, he jumps on the bike and he generates energy. And he says this is a way to exercise, but also to produce energy for the different needs that he has. Another example comes from the duo of Hyperconf from the island of Tinos. Hyperconf are artists and designers. They decided to live in small islands of the Cyclades. They grow their own vegetables and they're building their own infrastructure. And this is an image from a project that they did last year. It's called the Film Seed Festival. And it's an outdoor rural film festival which is powered by the energy and the food that can be grown, can be produced in the very film that it takes place. So what happens is that basically they planted peanuts, and the farming was also technologically assisted by some smart farming sensors that monitored the weather and the water use. And after they harvested the peanuts, half of the crop was converted into peanut oil. And then this was turned into biodiesel by thanks to a collaboration that they also had with the Democritus University of Thraiki. And this provided the electricity needed to power a cinema projector, as well as speakers and lights for their festival. And the remaining harvest, they used it to offer peanuts to the public that attended the festival. And I think it's a kind of an interesting example of how smart infrastructures can be used while also embracing and supporting local knowledge, because they collaborated with farmers from the island, from this village. I would also like to mention quickly the important work of Iverke Luckenwalde here in Germany, a space that you might know, a contemporary art space which used to be a power station for over 60 years. It ceased its operation after the Berlin Wall fell. And back in 2012, artist Pablo Wendel established a contemporary art center there. And he also started the non-for-profit energy provider Performance Electrics. He reached out to the local community, to people that used to work there at the power station, and he found a way to start again its operation, but not with fossil fuels, but rather with using pyrolysis. And he also started using renewable technology. The interesting thing is that they also produce their own electricity. They call it Kunststrom, and you can have them as a provider instead of having some other provider if you want. They even supply the national grid with it. And the other important element that is worth mentioning is that somehow they adapt their activities in a way that they really have a program that respects the sustainability goals. So they try not to have people traveling, they try not to have a very compact program, and they very much respect this process of deceleration with the sacrifices that it brings. And there are more examples that one can bring in. I just mentioned them very quickly here, like the initiative of Sakiya in Ramallah in Palestine, which was initiated by Nida Sinokrot and Sahar Kavazmi, an artist and an architect, who wanted to bring together agriculture and technology and art. And they based all their philosophy on permaculture. And they brought to the surface the logic of the guild, the idea that groupings, the same way that in permaculture, groupings of plants, trees, and animals and insects can, let's say, operate together. They kind of try to create a community by artists, agroecologists, musicians, farmers, writers, teachers, and this is how they kind of bring together both traditional knowledge and low-tech forms and knowledge from different disciplines. And another example from Slovenia, the Mandrova House in Novi Court by the artist Plateau Residue, who renovated an abandoned farmhouse at a small village in a Slovenian forest. Their artistic work more has to do with species extinction, but they use this place where they also live to run workshops for self-sufficiency and to create, to empower more respectful relationship with the living environment. And yeah, all in all, what I see in these approaches and I find interesting is that they are, I think that they can be considered as examples of practices and technologies of conviviality, of degrowth, and of care for the environment. I think it's great to notice how artists in these cases become initiators that build works that are understood as open prototypes. They put their emphasis on sharing knowledge with the local community or the online community. The waste produced is low or no waste at all. They always address these examples, the different needs of a specific community or in a location, so they situate the practice in time and place, and ultimately they propose a way to act and to have agency. So I think that such initiatives empower a politics of caring, but also a kind of a politics, a different politics of scale. This is a term by a Greek scholar, Vasilis Kostakis, who calls a politics of scale the one that is bottom up, that is not imposed, and that considers the unique cultural and environmental context. And so when people and communities learn from each other, and a new heterogeneous and dynamic network of technologies and infrastructures emerges, then it is possible to provoke possibly behavioral and systemic change. So I think the point here is to embrace sustainability on an ecological and social level, and to empower and restore the relationships of the human world to the environment. I believe that planetary care starts somewhere here, and that I would close with a quote by George Kallis, and his book, The Freedom of Limits, where he basically highlights that it is time to hit the brake and to realize that this planet and its resources are enough. And we need basically to set our own limits, and we also need to respect them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Daphne. That was really interesting, very inspiring. Thank you so much for being here. We have now the opportunity to ask some questions. Maybe if you have anything in mind, you can share it now with us, with Daphne. Are there any questions from the audience? I don't see any. I can start maybe with a comment or also with a question from my side, especially directed to the last part of your talk, the last bit. So I was wondering, because I find all the projects and the directions, you pointed in a lot of directions, really interesting. I was wondering what was kind of or what did you take out from studying as a curator and a writer these topics? So how did it transform your own practice as a curator? Maybe I can share a little bit of context from our Medienwerk network. I feel that we have like very similar discussions in a lot of institutions. We will have a study group later this year and organize a study group exactly on degrowth. And I feel that there are a lot of very practical questions also, like in the discussion, from sustainability of materials when we build exhibition architectures, for instance, also the problem of energy and technological equipment, but also like this question of how can we create these new kind of relationships, like in the last two projects, right? So new kind of practices of care, also how do we want to cooperate with each other, and how do we want to foster these kind of new forms of relation. And I also think our role is kind of contradictory as mediators, right? Because I think we we're having a role in this kind of cultural system where it's kind of expected to produce more projects, and where like there is a lack of investment in longer lasting structures. So I was really wondering, so how did like studying these topics transform your own practice? So what do you think?
Yeah, well, thanks for the question. It it all started from realizing this contradiction. I mean, to an extent, I mean, these were thoughts that I had in my mind, and for especially for the exhibition Weather Engines, for instance, we were invited and we wanted to respect in a way the sustainability goals, and so we did, but we didn't manage to reach a low energy consumption because there was so much technology involved. And I realized that, okay, this is an impasse. And somehow we need to acknowledge this if we want to continue producing exhibitions, at least. And then all the artists that I was in touch with for this exhibition or for other projects were always very stressed about how they continuously have to come up with new work? How do you have to continuously come up with new ideas? It's a problem that I myself am experiencing for myself, that I need to produce all the time. And reading about the growth made me kind of realize that there is a question there, that to which extent can the art world really degrow? What kind of sacrifices can we do when we are a field leaving aside, I don't know, the star artists and star curators and all the very big institutions, that it's anyway, we anyway live a very precarious life. So how many sacrifices can you do there? And the thing is that we need to do less, either we like it or not. And we also need to acknowledge that if you do too much, it will not all be good. So this is a way to also start by realizing that the sacrifice that you will make at the end is not such a big sacrifice. So I first started myself trying to implement that in a way. And then I started talking about it. And I started realizing that all these beautiful projects that I find, and I mentioned some here, are not so easy to present. I mean, I love talking about them in a lecture, but it would be contradictory to try to bring this project in an exhibition space. And you cannot really exit this contradiction, but we might slowly realize that we might have to exit our nice-looking bubble. And it will take time to do that. But I more and more acknowledge and turn to artists that no longer discuss important environmental topics, but also take a stance in life towards that. Yeah.
Thanks a lot. Are there any more questions or comments? Maybe we will take a short moment. Anything? Okay. If not, thank you so much, Daphne.
Thank you. Thank you.
Please, stay here, and please a huge applause for Daphne.